Good morning and welcome to this week's discussion with Jump. And this week we're talking about the big stick is broken. So, what should recruitment leaders be actually doing? But first of all, some stats, and it's always good to have some stats. As you can see, Dave is on a bus. Yes, it's a first for Jump. Dave is actually on a bus. Dave, let's see if you can just mute yourself while you're there because your bus is very squeaky, but we can get to it from there. But let's hit some stats. And remember, if you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe to our channel. It'll be lovely for you to do that and grow our numbers from there. First stat: 89% of Gen Z and 92% of millennials say a sense of purpose is essential for their job satisfaction and well-being. And by 2030, those two generations will make up 74% of the global workforce. So the team you will lead next year is already running on purpose, not pay. Our second stat that comes in, and the UK is in a leadership recession. Only 10% of UK workers are engaged at work. 90% are enthusiastic about what they do. And that fuels the gap. And about £257 billion of productivity drain is on the UK economy every year because of the workforce disengagement. So leadership in our country is quietly the biggest economic problem that we have. The third stat that comes out, this was from Gallup from there. So this should really sit on, I think, every owner's desk. Managers account for 70% of the vacancies in team engagement. The single biggest variable is whether or not your team stays, performs, or grows is the managers directly above them. And only 44% of managers report having ever received any formal training. And the final stat, the UK number that every recruitment owner in the audience should be sitting with is 82% of UK managers are accidental managers, people promoted into leadership with no formal training. 28% of UK employees say they have left because of the poor relationship with their manager, and 33% say that they are less motivated to do their work because of inefficient management. So the big stick is definitely broken. So we're going to look at that and see why it is. So what it actually boils down to when you think about it from recruitment is that 8 out of 10 recruitment leaders are accidental managers. That's not a soft observation, that's hard fact. So the next 45 minutes, we're going to look at what great actually looks like. And when 8% of your people are leading recruitment teams that have never been trained, how we can do that. As you can see, Dave's joined us. He was rushed to Edinburgh for a meeting, and he's on the bus from there. So hopefully his Wi-Fi will hang out. Paul is meant to be joining us as well, but he's with a client that's run over, should I say? He's run off. He's been run over. That's run over. So we'll kick off and work from there. So question one, Dave. Okay. Let's go back to those stats. 89% of Gen Z say purpose is central to their job. 53% of recruiters report burnout. The big stick is just, the big stick of just working hard has really finished. So, from a coaching point of view, what are you seeing the big stick failing recruitment owners with right now? And what is the moment an owner realizes that it's actually stopped working?
Thanks, Howard. Hopefully everyone can hear me. My apologies for the slight squeal that you're getting on my microphone, but that's what the M90 on the way to St Andrews over the Firth of Forth does for you. But it is, you can tell this is live. One thing that's really encouraging in answer to that question is I'm not seeing many managers using the big stick. I think over the past few years, as certainly post-COVID, most managers have worked out that actually the best way of getting the best out of their people that we're talking to isn't to use the big stick approach. I'm sure that there are some, and there are absolutely some organisations in the recruitment world, part of their purpose is actually to use the big stick approach. Make 100 calls a day. You've got to survive your first 6 weeks. You've got to do this. You've got to do that. And if you survive, then you can stay. And if not, then we don't care. And that's part of the purpose. And they train their people. They take on people or take on 20 people or maybe hope 5 will work out. It's a costly way of doing it, but it's not necessarily the most effective way. But for some of them, that's part of the purpose. But I'm seeing that people are learning, that they are working out what it is that gets the people people to be motivated to perform, and that purpose and that culture that David is working and is holding out, and they're getting some good results, particularly in challenging times now. And we've spoken about challenging times. The big stick doesn't work, but culturally, if you can inform, if you can coach, if you can mentor your staff, you know that that's going to work better.
So I think it's an interesting point, isn't it? And I think I'm seeing a bit of a mixture of big stick, and I'm seeing a mixture of sort of new sort of management techniques. And I think that's because the dynamic in the team has changed. And I think the younger workforce, we've got an older management spine, but the workforce have got more options. And I think the younger people are less impressed by a commission scheme and the commission story you can earn this amount in the first year, etc. And most are actually looking for career development. And I think, that true work-life balance becomes second, and earning potential becomes third when you start to look at what triggers make people in there. So I think the big stick has never actually worked. It just looked like it did because recruiters had nowhere else to go. And I think gone are the days when, I remember this vividly. Gone are the days when you used to stand up at 6:30 in the evening to leave, and your manager would give you a really hard glare, and you'd sit that back down because you're there. But it's very different times because you can now get hold of candidates through the day where you couldn't in the olden days. But we haven't really changed our model. And our model survived on having a captive audience at certain times of the day. And now we haven't got a captive audience. The audience is captive all the way through the day. So you can do different things. And at the moment owners realize that it's not, I suppose the owners realize this, that their management style isn't working not when their top biller resigns, but when 3 or 4 weeks later, someone else resigns, and then someone else resigns, and then someone else resigns. Because it's never about the people, it's all about the people. And we all know that, sorry, it's all about the manager. And I think we know that, from the stats, people leave poor management because they're disconnected. And I think most owners think leadership is fine because their team are too polite to tell them otherwise. And the data tells us that 53% burnout. So there's something wrong with the way that we're managing people and looking at that. And that's not your team telling everything okay. That's the world that's telling everything's not okay. 43% attrition in the UK. What does that tell you in the recruitment market? That was the stat that we had last week. And where most leaders are blaming the people, simply not cut out for recruitment. They're not as good as recruiters as we were in our day, exactly. When actually we should be blaming the process. And it's the process that's at fault, and we should be looking at how that works from there. So we should be thinking about that and how that works. So when we start to look at those things, okay, I started to think about what levers that you would have for people coming into the business. And so I've created 5 levers that I think we should be looking at, which is purpose, growth paths, autonomy, recognition, and well-being. So from your coaching practices, Dave, what levers is the one most recruitment owners are weakest on, and what is the weakest actually costing them?
I think of those 4 things, the key thing that people are looking for is a growth path. Of those that you listed, people want to be part of a growing organisation, even if things are tough, even if the markets are challenging. They want to know that what they're doing and what they're part of is a growing organisation. And that doesn't have to be they're seeing a growth in the number of heads working or the number of desks filled. It's just that the organisation has a purpose. And part of that purpose is we want to grow. We want to grow in influence. We want to grow in the type of services that we aspire to. For example, we're not just a recruitment company. We now provide advisory services. Or if we used to provide maybe we do some higher end searches or some interim work. So I think that's a really important point, important part of people staying with organisations, because they know they're part of a company that's going somewhere. And it's like having an ordnance survey map. If your company hasn't got an ordnance survey map, in other words, it doesn't know where it's going, it doesn't know the detail, the processes, how it's going to get there, what the strategy is, what your part is in it, and it doesn't have a navigator, i.e. the team leader, the manager, the director, the owner, whoever it may be, then I think that becomes less of an exciting place to live. Because growth can come from a number of different factors, and growth itself has its own levers. And I think that's quite important. So I think of the 4 things for me, the growth path is really important.
I think that's interesting because I think I agree the growth pattern is the most important. I think most recruitment owners inherit a career ladder from, let's say, 2010 and never actually rebuilt it. And half the rungs are missing, half the roles are missing for 2006, and nobody actually climbs the ladder. And I think the five leaders are actually connected. So being weak on any one of them sort of shows up on the others. And, whatever we pick, that happens. And I think that I've used this description in the past about using the word terror, and I spell terror TERA to describe what those five leaders look like now. And I've used that T as tribe, everyone pulling together for the same purpose. And I think once you've got a tribe that pulls together for the same purpose, that's right. Ease expectation, so your growth paths, because expectation goes both ways. And what the business expects from the employee is one thing, but what does the employee expect from the business now is equally important. And I think we tend not to do that as well as we should do. Rank is how we make people feel, is the R. Do you make them feel good about themselves? Do you make them feel better about themselves? Or do we keep, you know, beating them up and pushing them backwards, etc.? And, listening to that 53% people burn out says that our well-being isn't great. We're not good at looking after our staff and stuff like that. And I think the final one is, autonomy. Everyone wants to have their say. And I think if we consistently micromanage our people and lack of trust, and that trust has been a real big problem with people working from home for quite a lot of companies, so autonomy sort of gone out the window. So I think we look at that, and our autonomy one is really the second biggest one, I think, that we have, because recruiters love to say they give autonomy when actually they don't. Checking a pipeline every week, checking the pipeline every day, overriding senior placements, not meeting people for meetings, etc., because they're too busy doing sort of different things. That happens. And I think we've got to start to think about that. And then when you look at that growth path, if you can't, if I rang your recruiter today and asked you, what's your recruitment look like or your growth path look like for the next 3 years, and they can't answer that, just think they're one LinkedIn message or one call away from a R2R from a client who actually can say that, or a recruitment agency that can articulate those type of things for them leaving. And I think we've got to sort of take that in, you know, context, that people leave because someone offered them something better today. It's not all about money at the moment. It's not about someone offering an extra 10 grand as it was 3 or 4 years ago. It's about what can you offer with regards to their growth. And I think we're missing that massively. And when we start to recruit people, we should be recruiting people for the team, not the position. But that moves on to one of those sort of other ones, as in recognition is a lever that most recruitment owners sort of say they understand, but most teams say they don't get enough of. So why is there such a gap? What does great recognition actually look like in a recruitment business in 2026? Walk us through what you would be telling owners to do this week as part of recognition.
For me, recognition has to connect to meaning, not just money. So when you reward individuals, when you reward a team, you have to put it in context where this is where you fit in and this is why what you've done makes such a difference. Because often in sales roles within recruitment, obviously there's money, there's commission, but remember 20% of roles in recruitment aren't sales roles. And people get their base salary, but maybe there are rare bonuses, but often there isn't everything else. So recognition really matters. And if you can put that into meaning, I think that's really important, particularly with those who have, say, 3 to 7 years worth of experience, because they know what the money is and they know what they potentially could earn. So what else is it that as leaders we can give those people? How else can we help them to encourage them to develop their skills and to recognise them for what they're doing? It's about what they do, not just what they invoice. And for me, that recognition has got to be linked to meaning. I'm giving relatively short answers. The bus has stopped there. I'm on to Howard. So the wine may have gone, but I'm going to still carry on and put myself on mute when I'm not speaking.
The wine's still there, Dave. The wine's still there. Okay. I think there's a very interesting conversation. I think most owners pay commission and think it's recognition, because that's what we're paying for them for, isn't it? When it's not. Commission is a contractual thing, as is salary. Recognition, I think, is something else completely entirely. And I think the gap is wide because giving frequent specific recognition feels uncomfortable for quite a lot of leaders. It feels a little bit too Gen Z, and that inner voice is saying, I remember doing 200K in a quarter and no one said well to me or well done to me, etc., etc. So that old school mentality from a recruitment leader, who's been managed that way and will then carry on managing that way, it doesn't feel very recruitment. It's wrong. And it costs them their best people. I think what great recognition actually looks like is not a quarterly award or a bottle of champagne. It's recognizing when someone does something good, no matter how small it is, just that little conversation about that was really good, that was really this, etc., etc. It's doing that in numerous ways, whether it's verbally doing it to them, whether doing it over email, whether just giving them a quick call if you hear something from there. And it's doing those things in genuine reasons, having genuine praise and genuine recognition. And I used to sort of think, I looked at, I remember sort of my old manager made me think in this way, that recognition was something that, should be only on the big things. And in my last specific recognition moment was when I was a top biller and I needed some support. And what I suddenly noticed was that I got no support from my manager unless I'd hit the big target and things like that. So I started to use it when I started to go into management. I started to use a 7-day cycle. And if I hadn't recognized someone's performance within 7 days, every week, etc., then I had a recognition problem. And even when I was managing 100 plus recruiters, I'd look for reasons to go out my way to praise my team because I knew that that was retention and that was the biggest growth lever that I could have. And when I started to look at that, I started to prove that retention was mainly because of how the management treated people. So the question was, do we have a resignation problem? Okay. Or do we have a resignation problem that's brewing because we're not recognizing people or recognizing people properly? So I think that's what we've got to start to build and that we've got to start to move from. And Paul's joined us. So Dave's very happy, Dave, because Dave's on a bus today. Planes, trains, and automobiles.
Hello, buddy.
Hello, mate.
So the question was, so you can jump in on the question. The question was, so we can jump in.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what. I'm going to jump off now because I'm not sure how long my signal will last.
Right, Dave. But thanks for joining it, and thanks for the
nice
amusing ride.
I will leave you as I enter Rosyth in northern Scotland. See you later, everybody.
Cheers, Dave.
So the question, Paul, is this: recognition is a lever for most owners. So recognition is the lever that most recruitment owners say they understand, but most of the teams say that's not enough of. Why is there such a gap? And what does great recognition actually look like in the recruitment business in 2026? So could you walk us through how you would tell owners that you're dealing with or in your past what to do from a recognition point of view?
It's a great question, actually, Howard, because I think, over the years, traditionally what recruitment owners and businesses have done is their definition of recognition is to do with money, essentially, paying bonuses, paying better commission rates, trips abroad, all the things that we're all kind of used to. And by the way, obviously, there's nothing too much wrong with that. But I think what we know about the current generation, that we see in the office space now, and we're talking Gen Alpha now, not just Gen Z, is that whilst money is important to them, what's much more important to them are other elements of recognition. And I think that when we think about the word recognition, I think what people want to see in the office is to be seen, to be to be recognized for who they are and what they're doing in the business, not just for their financial contributions to the organization. So it's recognition relevant to who they are as a human being, what they provide to the company in a whole range of ways. And I think that comes down to, for the owners, for the leaders of a business, to make themselves aware of contributions made by that individual as part of the team, as part of the infrastructure, ideas that they generate, things they've done in relation to great service to clients, to candidates, thoughts they have in terms of improvements within the organization, innovations that they've produced, and of course, importantly, recognition in relation to who they are from the perspective of their well-being and without being too intrusive, their lives and so forth. I think we know that there's a level of sensitivity now that perhaps didn't exist 10, 15 years ago. I think you've talked about the big stick approach, the approach that we grew up in. It has its pluses, it certainly has lots of minuses, and we know very well, because all the evidence is there, that current generations working in our offices do not appreciate that approach and will vote with their feet. So it's about being more tactile as leaders and owners. It's about being more aware of what's going on in the organization. It's also about expecting or creating an open environment where people's opinions are sought, where people are seen and listened to, and that sometimes, not always, their thoughts and ideas are brought into the business and utilized, and that they're given the recognition and the rewards around those things. It's a more tactile approach than it's ever been. And if people fail to recognize that, they're going to lose good quality young people.
It's quite interesting now that the buzz that the Dave buzz has disappeared out of my ears. I can now concentrate a little bit more, because it was very excuse. I'm sure the people on the other end couldn't hear it all the time, but I had it all the time in my ears. I was doing this with some of my clients last week, because we were talking about this last week with some of my clients, and I asked two business owners the same question. Name the last three specific things you praised your top billers for. Give me a date, give me the situation. And if you can't give me it in 30 seconds, guess what? Your top billers can't do that either. And then I said, right, okay, so now I think that's just your top billers. Now look at everybody else that's in your business.
Yep.
And I then started to liken it to one thing that was happening quite a couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. Everyone was talking about quiet quitting, weren't they?
Yes.
And they were talking about quiet quitting. So you think, if you're not praising your people and you can't name the time and the situation when you praised them in the last 7 days,
yeah,
and neither can they, then quite possibly they're quiet quitting and they're looking to go elsewhere, because that is a real big part of retention in the modern day world. And we seem to be missing that quite significantly.
I think you make a great point. And I do think, and I think anyone that's on this listening right now will agree with this point. I mean, we've been around a long time in our industry, Howard, and there's been a sort of binary view ever since I started that the only measure of success in our industry is linked to invoicing, to billing. Right? Okay, now it's hard to disagree, because we're in business to make money. We're in business to boost our revenues, increase our profits. That's what same for any business in any industry. But it is very binary. It's very finessed. That's it. You either bill well or you don't bill well. And we've all seen, big billers reaching seniority when frankly they shouldn't have done, and other people that made terrific contributions within the business not necessarily getting the recognition they needed. I don't think we're ever going to get away from the fact that we work in a sales industry, and ultimately we will always measure people on what their financial contributions are to businesses. But let's be very clear, we have to be more nuanced now about what recognition and praise we give to people. And that, I think, comes down to what I said and what you've said, which is you've got to be looking as an owner and a director in a business for maybe fairly minor things that may seem fairly minor things, but a reason to say well done to people. But you have to create an environment where people are seen. We see them. We see what they do. We're aware of what goes on in the office. We're not just sat behind a desk looking at figures. We are aware of actions and behaviors of people. We invite regularly through, and we'll probably get to this, meetings, ideas, thoughts, innovations. We're very prepared to listen, and we are not shy and not slow to say well done, congratulations. And by the way, that isn't necessarily related to giving people bonus payments or trips abroad. Sometimes a pat on the back and a hand shaken creates more bonding than a check that you receive that you've spent without remembering what you spent it on.
Yeah. So let's move on then. So if you think about top billers and your senior consultants, and then you look at a 22-year-old sort of graduate, each need a different version of you as a leader. So what does that actually look like in practice? And where do recruitment owners most often get it wrong?
So I think this is kind of absolutely leading from what we've said. You have to know each person. Now, you know, if there are people on this call that have got a large business, they can't know every person in that business. We know that. But that's a delegation task that's relative to your management team. But as a manager, my job would be to really get to know each person that works for me in the truest sense. And for me, that would be not just about understanding what they're doing in their jobs, but also getting close enough to know them as a human being. And I would make it my purpose to spend time with each of them every single week, not only on the sort of standard one-to-one, so which I would always advocate every week, a half an hour, 45 minute sit-down conversation, one-on-one, purely confidential with that person, but also sporadically throughout the week, spending a bit of time with each of them and having reasons for doing it, whether it's working alongside them on a particular project, or whether it's grabbing a quick cup of coffee with them, or even a quick lunch, but finding reasons to get to know people, because every human being is different. I mean, you've categorized, and there's nothing wrong with what you said, you know, a senior consultant, you've said a 22-year-old graduate. And I think these are decent categories, but it goes deeper than that, doesn't it? It goes deeper. It goes down to the human that you are, the person that you are, where you came from, your education, your upbringing, your socialization. What do we know about that individual? Do we know what's going on, not only in their work lives, but outside of their work lives? Because only then, by bonding with those people, getting close to those people, will you create an environment of trust. And if you have that and you have a deeper understanding of that person, you have a much better chance of retaining that human being and getting the best out of them. You can't manage people the same. You know, you simply can't have a sort of one approach suits all approach to managing people. And I'm afraid lots of managers do exactly that. It's finding the time and recognizing that it's time well spent, not time wasted, that makes the difference.
I think each generation needs a different leadership style. So I mentioned those because it was the generation sort of.
You're not wrong.
Needs more structure and feedback. A senior consultant needs more autonomy and
it's
trust.
Nuanced, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think your top biller needs partnership. And I think where owners get it wrong is they default to one style.
Yes.
And that one that they work for them with every recruiter. So I remember as a top biller, you moved into a manager, then you treat everyone, including the new people, like a top biller. Yep. But then all your grads sink, you know. So if you came up as a coach and you treat your top billers like they're a graduate, they don't like that and they leave. So your leader needs to have many hats, and each hat needs to create a different persona that creates, I suppose, that person that they're engaging with at the time. And I think the most underrated of the three is the top biller. Most owners think that they give their top biller partnership when they're actually not. They're giving them probably a KPI grid dressed up as accountability. And top billers know the difference. And I think we should be asking them for their advice, tapping into their knowledge, siphoning off their skills to the rest of the team. I think praising them not for their billings, but for all the little things that they do.
Yes.
The things that make them a top biller. Not just lauding, as you said, not just lauding for the financial, compensation that they get and the financial effort that they put into the business. I think partnership is the biggest asset that you can build with a growing business with your top billers, because it keeps your top billers engaged. And then you look at your 22-year-old grad, that person doesn't want to be left alone. They want to be developed. The senior doesn't want to be managed. They want to be trusted. And the top biller doesn't want to be managed at all. They want a peer-to-peer, conversation or relationship with the owners. And they're three different conversations every day. So, I think leadership style changes, and you've got to think whether you are leading, coaching, mentoring. And I think that's where people like you and I come in, where we can help a manager learn those traits and develop those traits based on the people that they have in their business, because sometimes they only know what they know. and they feel that how they're managing everybody is the right thing to do, when actually that's the issue that they've got.
I think it's easy, I think you're completely right. But I think it's, when I think about myself as a younger person compared to some of the other people around me, I was like any person, I was unique and different. And the things that used to really motivate some of my colleagues had the reverse impact on me. It actually turned me off. And I wanted something very often from a personal perspective that I wasn't being given. I know that what it meant for me, and thinking back, was that I ended up behaving in a way that didn't feel comfortable sometimes to me personally, in order to compete with people on my peer group. We have a better way of thinking about these things these days, and I know, thinking back to my early years, I could have been managed much better than I was being managed. I think they would have got better performance out of me, and I would have learned a lot quicker had people taken a more personal approach to me. That, by the way, could be said of everyone around me. But I was treated the same as everybody else, and it was that big stick environment. And you talk about KPIs. How many times, Howard, do you see business? I mean, we give people KPIs, use that horrible phrase. And then I'm not saying metrics are not important. I think metrics are super important in any business, whether it's our industry or any other industry. But do you ever see, or very rarely do you see, repercussions when people don't hit KPIs? Because I don't. What I end up, we get to the end of a week or a month, someone didn't hit their KPIs. What's the comeback? Most of the time, nothing, nothing. And people begin to think the KPIs and the metrics don't mean an awful lot because actually I don't have to hit them. Nothing happens to me. So we put a lot of reliance on things like that to beat people with. But the reality is it doesn't have any impact. And I think we have to be smarter than just giving people numbers and pushing them in that direction without using that, as you've said many times, a stick to beat people with.
So if we change the conversation then, and we talk us through the rhythm of what a great leader gets up every week in 2026, what they're doing on a Monday, what they're doing on a Wednesday, what they're doing on a Friday, that the average leader is not. What would you say that leaders should be doing then that they're not?
Okay, well, look, I think when you look at, there's a number of things here, Howard. I think when you look at the classic management books we could name, the ones we've all read, they all essentially say the same thing. They say that we should, as leaders, be spending the majority of our time looking outside of the business, not focused on the minutiae inside the business. Well, it's a utopia that none of us have ever actually achieved, but that is what they talk about. Spend 70% of your time looking outside of the company, wondering, looking at your competitors, looking at the landscape, talking to clients, seeing clients, understanding trends, and so on and so on. All of that is exactly what we should be doing. Instead, I think people spend almost all of their time they're looking internally, staring at themselves, staring at people around them, and getting involved in minutiae. Now, there is a balance between the two things, and I think that we do need to have an interesting construct within our week where we do have disciplined time with certain individuals that enable us to sit and talk to them about their roles and about, through them, what's happening in the market, through them, what's happening with the competitor landscape, and understand not only what's going on within their areas, but also their vision of what's going on outside of the company. And for me, that comes down to, and you've kind of hinted at this stuff, the meetings in a week. Now, when I hear the word meetings, it tends to sound terribly formal. You kind of think of it as having agendas and we're going to write stuff down or we're going to record stuff that's going to go on to records and CRM or whatever. I actually think meetings can be simply grabbing a donut and a coffee with somebody at a certain point in a week and a more casual attitude to just sitting and chatting with people, getting to know them. I do think there are times, as I've already said, where a weekly one-to-one with an individual is called for to establish how they're getting on, what happened last week, their plans for this week, and looking forward more than we look back. I think team conversations are clearly important, group conversations, and to that end, I've always thought that we should have morning meetings and in some cases lunchtime catch-ups as well. So I think there is a combination of fairly casual conversations that are not really casual, you've planned to have them, and also the formal business kind of meetings that we talk about. And then I think there are moments once a month perhaps where we innovate together, we talk together about what could be improved in certain areas of the organization. Now that conversation I think comes out of the looking out of the business, talking to clients to understand what keeps those people awake at night and what potential solutions we can come up with to help them.
So I've had a similar question last week about what would you do every week, etc., etc. So I cribbed this question from that. And last week I gave a bit of a tongue-in-cheek answer of what people should be doing, etc. So I'm going to sort of give again another bit of a tongue-in-cheek answer. But I think the word rhythm is what really started me to think about this question. Okay, so Mondays, Monday's really team huddle, isn't it? Find out what everyone's doing the week, what their goals are, find out what their issues are, but never dig into the weeds to cure the issues. Set that week off with a big bang. Tuesday would all be one-to-ones. Now, I think that's one of the biggest killers that consultants get, because how many times do you cancel those one-to-ones?
Yeah.
And what does that say to your consultant about how much you care about them? It says you have zero time for them or zero respect for them. Wednesday, I always think to me, Wednesday was always about getting out and seeing your clients, visiting clients, developing clients. And Thursday was always about coaching your people and developing your people. That's digging into the weeds and developing your people. And Friday was a strategic hour. What's working, what's not working, what can we do quicker? What could I give my team that gives them an advantage? It's not about how they bill more. It's about how you create a process that creates time for them to engage with more clients and candidates. And I think the point is rhythm is non-negotiable, but great leaders tend not to skip the one-to-ones because they know that that's the right thing to do. They tend not to skip the strategic hour because they know that's where the fires are caught and firefighting happens. And rhythm works because it creates the gap between the spontaneity of work and what needs a formula. And I think we've got to start to get that rhythm where you're doing certain things at certain times. And the honest truth is that most recruitment leaders don't have a week 11. It's just chaotic all the way through. And that's the thing that happens. It's just a creating. And then things like the strategic hour never happens. The huddle becomes a 10-minute KPI review rather than something that's genuine about motivating and people like that. And I think nobody sort of tells a leader that there is a rhythm to what you can do.
No, I think you use a really good phrase. Ironically, I had a conversation this morning with a fairly senior person in an organization who was asking me, how do I get closer to the person that owns this business? And I mean, we had a very positive conversation. We came up with some ideas. You could turn that on its head and look at the situation and say, why is that person asking me that question? Why isn't the leader of the business finding time to spend with that individual? Because that should be the way around. It should be that the person ultimately managing the business is thinking, I've got pivotal people here. I've got people who, my business is in their hands. What can I do to get close to these people, to support them, to help them, to give them guidance, to be a mentor to those individuals, given my knowledge and experience? Should it be the case that the subordinate, if I can use that phrase, is asking the question, how do I get closer? That you could argue strongly, it's a conversation that shouldn't really be happening.
But I think there's a conversation that leads to that, though, because when they're good leaders in a rhythm, they're calmer, they're sharper, they're more strategic, etc. And I think if you look at as a leader, as a conductor, are the band playing in tune or are they playing out of tune? And I think that's what we tend to find is that when we're not in a rhythm, we get out of tune. And once we're out of tune, then bad things start to happen. And I think we've got to start to look at that as a leadership, is that rhythm gives you that calmness. It protects certain things like your strategic hour, like what you're talking about, meeting with the people that are important on a regular basis. That becomes rhythm. If it's just ad hoc, then it doesn't really have the impact that it should have. You talked about leadership behaviors there, Paul, and you sort of looked at leadership. So I say, name the leadership behaviors that you most often see in recruitment owners that quietly drive their best people out. And you start to allude to that. Not the obvious ones, but the ones the owner is doing while convincing themselves that they're being a great leader.
Look, I think it comes down to something pretty straightforward. I think that, businesses tend to reflect the behaviors and values of the leaders, right? So, if I'm working for a company and I see the correct behaviors and attitudes of the people that I work for, I see them, I hear them, I'm listening to them, I can see their words, I can hear their words, they're leading by example, then that will influence me to behave in a similar way. So I think the answer is very much about leading by example here. Um, I think it's one thing to say this is what I want from people that work for the business, work for me. I think it's another to actually demonstrate those things. And to demonstrate those behaviors, you have to be visible in a whole range of ways. And we've talked here about visibility individually with people and from a team perspective. I also think it talks to being visible in front of clients, talking to customers, even with candidates in the right way, and so forth. It's having a strong presence that pervades the business. And when you analyze very successful businesses, when they talk about their leaders, the people, the founders, you'll often find the conversation revolves around their personalities and the impact of those personalities within the culture of the business, good or bad. And I think that it's about visibility, and for leaders, it's about recognizing that even being in a room, their aura, the way they behave, their body language, their words may have a major impact and influence on the people around them. And if you want the right behaviors and values from people, you have to demonstrate those visibly, not hiding behind your desk.
I think if we get rid of the usual obvious ones like micromanagement, and all those sort of things that go on, I think it's the habits that we need to change. And I remember going through this as a leader myself and going through this as a manager myself. And the first thing I did worked hard on was because my manager constantly did this to me. And it was the thing that I hated most was you start to do something and they just walk past and go, I'd do that differently. Yep. I'd have made a different decision.
Yep.
And it sort of tells the person that their judgmental is provisional and it doesn't count. I repeat that weekly, every year. To me, and it did drive me to do this, it was a resignation in slow motion, because you're just starting to resign, because it doesn't matter what you do, that person's going to do the opposite, find fault. And I hated that. I generally hated that. Yeah. The second thing was keeping the strategic conversations to yourself. Senior people and senior consultants aren't daft, they're not stupid.
No.
They notice that there's a real conversations that are happening in the boardroom and they're not invited, and they'll leave for someone where they are invited into those conversations, because they're your best people, but we're freezing them out rather than welcoming them in. And they have so much knowledge that we could be building a really good business on it. But we're killing it by not inviting them in, because as a leader, you get further and further away from the coalface sometimes. And we still don't see that until it's too late. And when it's too late, that experience, that knowledge has walked out the door and is giving it to a different business. And I think the third habit that I'd change is knowing the difference between what a great owner and what a great leader is. And excuse me, I think many recruitment owners are brilliant operators, brilliant salespeople, build businesses. Almost none of them have any leadership training, and they wonder why their teams leave, and they wonder, they keep wondering that. And I think, what frustrates people is, is it about how you lead them? If you tell, I think I'm trying to sort of put that in a way that, when you're leading people, you have to lead them to where they want to go, but you have to also lead them to where you want them to go.
Yeah.
And there's two very different things, but if you get those two things right and you get them going in the right direction, that gathers momentum.
Yep.
That momentum then gathers more momentum and more people join in. And I think what business leaders do quite often is they keep squashing the momentum and keep killing the momentum by doing those three things, by constantly belittling people, constantly keeping people out of the strategic conversations, and constantly not knowing the difference between when to manage and when to lead.
I think you do absolutely right. I think the other thing, and maybe we've got one final question here, but I'll be quick. It's to constantly repeat the purpose of being in business. We know obviously a purpose of being in business is to make money and profits, and we all know that's pretty obvious. But what is your purpose as a business? Why are you here? Why would anybody use your business rather than your competitors' businesses? And it's about that constant discussion around the reasons for being here, what we're trying to achieve outside of the obvious, constantly discussing that, enhancing our purpose as an organization, and also constantly reminding people and giving people the opportunity to develop so that they can build their careers within the company. They can see a future for themselves as the company develops. They see a better future for themselves too. These are reasons why people stay in businesses where they don't know the purpose of a business, what we're here for, apart from making money, where they don't see a future for themselves because no one's developing them, no one's pointing out the career path for them. You also lose people along the way.
So let's move on to the last question then. If a recruitment owner does one thing differently next Monday morning, having sat through this session, what is the one thing that you would tell them to do and why?
Oh man, I mean, I think people need to analyze their time management, personal time management. Look carefully at what they do every week. You said it, it's very easy to get lost in a whole range of things in the week, but without necessarily getting anything constructive at the end of it. We can be incredibly busy every week. We are incredibly busy every week. I think sometimes it's important to step back and look at the time you spend. And the way to do that is to literally keep a log over a period of maybe 3-4 weeks of what you do. Where did you spend your time? How much time did you spend on it? And to step back with an open mind and ask yourself, am I using my time effectively here? And if I could create for myself an additional hour, even 2 hours a day, what would I do with that time? Because it's not a question that leaders and owners are not working hard. Of course they are. They're working ridiculous hours. The question is, are they using their time effectively? And that then comes back to working with your people and working with your customers. So I would ask them to sit down quietly on their own and start to make a note of what they're doing in their time and start to analyze that time and recognize that maybe, with the best will in the world, they're not always using their time effectively in the company.
So it's an interesting one. I thought about this quite long and hard when I sort of wrote the question is, when things aren't going to plan, I'd book a 30-minute meeting, not with my managers, but with my top people in the business, the billers. And I'd make that 30 minutes a really important 30 minutes. And I'd open the meeting with, what's on your mind that I've not asked about? And I'd listen and take notes. I won't try solve a problem in the conversation. I won't dig into the weeds. I just listen to what they have to say.
Yep.
Then I go to my management team and I ask them the same question. And if the answers are the same, great. We've got a culture which allows autonomy and we can see what's going on. But if they're different, with a culture where people are only telling you what you want to hear, and there's a huge difference. And I think the other thing that I would do is tell any other people to do on a Monday would be I'd pick your top biller, ask them what their next 3 year here looks like, and listen to what they have to say.
Yeah.
Because the conversation will tell you whether they have a future together or whether or not they've already lost them. And that's a bit of a wake-up call. You still have time to change them.
Yes, so, that's a good point.
Yeah. Recognizing someone specifically by name, by behavior is important. And I think when you do recognize people by name and behavior, watch what they do in the next 2 or 3 hours. Watch what happens. Watch the small inputs. Watch the big things that come out of those. And I remember the comment when we started doing these webinars at the beginning of lockdown. And I can't remember who said it. One of us will have said it. We said, if you look after your people, they will in turn look after your clients and candidates, which will in turn look after you, the owner.
Absolutely.
And I don't think much has changed, but what we've stopped doing is properly looking after our people. I think we've stopped clapping for the NHS, haven't we? Type scenario. But that creates a snowball effect. And I think that's where we've got to today, that we've stopped truly looking after our people when we did at lockdown, and how we coached and developed them and what results we got immediately after lockdown when the market exploded. But then we started to lose that type of management style because business was going well. Then it started to have a problem because the market changed. but we didn't change with the market. We allowed our processes to die away, and now we're left in a situation where we have to rebuild those processes, because the question really is about growth in your business, is about the retention of your people and the retention of your clients, and that all relies on how you treat both of them.
Yeah.
Paul, lovely to have you back.
It's nice to see you.
Nice to see you. Lovely jumping in. Dave, if he's on his bus, he's got off his bus, I hope, wherever he's going, St Andrews. I can't believe Dave joined on a bus, but there you go. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks very much for your time. It's been an interesting one this week. Next week, we're going to look at the big issue next week that's outside our own people. And the big issue is about the quality of candidates, or quality candidates are now really hard to find, but we're still chasing jobs. So the question next week is, where is the real money in 2026 in recruitment, and are we doing the right thing? So, ladies and gentlemen, I look forward to seeing you then. Paul, thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure. Thanks, Howard.
Catching up as usual, and I'll see you all next week. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye, everybody.